So does anyone out there give even like a passing glance to XXL anymore? It seems like most people, at least casually, don't really get excited about the annual XXL Freshman List anymore like they used to a few years ago. And with the release of the 2023 issue, lots of folks in hip-hop circles have vehemently claimed it as the single worst roster in XXL history. It's been a couple months since the ciphers and such came out, and after letting it sit with me for a while, I thought it would be fun to see where it ranks amongst the other classes in a big ol' ranking of every XXL freshman class, to see if it is the worst ever, or if people are just overreacting. And furthermore, to see where XXL peaked in terms of their viability to predict who will become rap's next big name. Now, as always, this is just going to be my opinion, ranking these rappers off of their commercial popularity, critical success, impact, influence, and my personal taste on their music. There have been several lists like this in the past, including a really good one from Lyrical Central in 2018 and Alpha Media in 2021. But obviously those are pretty outdated now, and they don't include the newer classes, so I think it's time for a proper deep dive of all 16 covers to see once and for all who rose up to the call and who face planted quicker than they came up. If you'd like to give your ranking in the comments, I'd love to see it, but as always, I ask that you keep it civil and you hear others out. With that though, I think we're all set to get into the ranking, beginning with my least favorite and what I would consider the worst of all of them at number 16, which is the 2007 freshman class. This list was the very first class XXL ever put together, and in my opinion is the weakest out of the bunch. The rappers included here were Saigon, Plies, Rich Boy, Gorilla Zoe, Joel Ortiz, Lupe Fiasco, Lil Boozy, Crooked I, Papoose, and Young Dro. And to me at least, as someone who wasn't paying attention to this scene as a 7-year-old, this list just doesn't do much for me. Lupe Fiasco is, to me, the best rapper from this roster. He is very influential, and he pretty much paved the way for a lot of future artists to develop their sound even over 15 years later. He definitely deserves a thumbs up here, but outside of him, there's not that many more who stand out to me. Crooked I and Joel Ortiz were part of Slaughterhouse for a while. That was Eminem's label with Joe Budden and Royce da 5'9", but they didn't really do much to set themselves apart from the rest of the pack. Plies was one of the bigger names when this list debuted, but he kind of fell to the back burner since then. His last proper album came out back in 2010, and a lot of, the younger fans don't really know much about him. He's definitely more of like an old school guy that sort of, failed to capitalize off the trends of today. Boozy had a lot of buzz back in the day, but I think he's more known for just being like a controversial guy in general, and just comes off like a bitter old dude for the most part that just always complains about, newer trends and newer people. He just wasn't able to adapt to the newer sound either. Papoose is probably best known now for being on Love and Hip Hop as opposed to music. Gorilla Zoe is just complete trash in my opinion. Like, I've just never heard a good song from him. And then everyone else, I just couldn't name you anything about them. They're just complete nobodies. So all in all, this list just doesn't have a lot going for it when compared to the newer issues, except for maybe Lupe Fiasco is really the only person that really stood the test of time here, but everybody else either fell into obscurity or just not that interesting to me, so as a result, this ranks in last place. So second from the bottom here at number 15 is another group that I feel like is overall pretty forgettable, and that is going to be the 2015 freshman class. This group included Fetty Wap, Dej Loaf, Rory, Kid Kid, OG Mako, Shy Glizzy, K-Camp, Vince Staples, Tink, and Goldlink. Now this is a step up from the 2007 list, as there's at least 3 main people that I think help prop it up, and those are going to be K-Camp, Goldlink, and Vince Staples. K-Camp had that big song Lottery a couple years ago on TikTok and really cemented himself as someone who can make some really impressive singles, and overall is just a very likable artist. I think he's one of the stronger ones from this batch. Goldlink had some big songs scattered since this list debuted, and all throughout his career. Every few years he'll pop off and he'll come back with a big hit. He's been nominated for a few Grammys and such. He's, got some awards here and there, so I think he's another solid pick. And then to me, the biggest of everyone here is definitely Vince Staples. Vince is a very consistent rapper. I feel like if you enjoy one of his albums, then you'll like all of them. He's never really put anything out that's totally flopped, you know? He's got a very loyal fandom, very steady output. He's one of the few rappers from any of these lists as well that's done, you know, stuff outside of music that's gotten him a lot of recognition. He was on Abbott Elementary. He's got some stuff in the works with Netflix. I think he's got like his own show and stuff. So he's kind of, you know, expanding outside of music and having a lot of fun with that. Vince is just a really stand-up guy. You know, I have a lot of respect for him and his story, his upbringing. I think he's one of the best examples of someone who really lived up to what XXL looks for when they put together the list. That being said, outside of those three though, I feel like most of the other people in this list drag it down quite a bit. Fetty Wap is one of those examples because he was easily the biggest name back in the day, but since then he's had, you know, a lot of trouble adapting to the more modern sounds. I know he's had some legal issues and stuff. Fetty Wap is very nostalgic. Like, if you go back and, you know, back in 2015, put your mindset in there, his songs were everywhere, man. They were, you know, in every store, on the radio, on YouTube. He had so much hype, but, you know, he's definitely had a pretty big fall off since then. Like I said, I think he went to jail recently, so that's, you know, definitely something that has sort of prevented him from becoming, you know, the big superstar that he once was. Dej Loaf, I do enjoy, but I feel like she's always been more in the R&B category. I never really considered her, you know, a proper rapper. I feel like she doesn't really belong with the rest of this group. She's a very talented performer and such, but she's never had that big, you know, breakthrough crossover type hit that really charted high or anything. She's just kind of always hanging out on the fringes of the mainstream. So I don't think she takes anything away from this list. She is very talented, like I said, but she doesn't really help it as much either, as much as some of the other people. She's just kind of in that middle ground. OG Mako is pretty much a one-hit wonder with You Guessed It, which was really big back in the day, but recently he's had some really bad health issues. He's got this really crazy like skin condition that eats away at his flesh. It's really gnarly, honestly. So it's just tough because it's hard to be committed to music and, you know, your professional projects when, you know, you're dealing with something like that. So that's kind of put him back, you know, on the back burner a little bit. Shy Glizzy has popped up here and there, but again, doesn't really have anything big, you know, a super mainstream hit or anything that really helps this list, at least since it came out. Kid, got no idea what he's been up to. Tink, no idea as well. And then Rory is someone who, kind of like Dej Loaf, I don't really consider him a rapper. He's more of like a folk singer type of guy, so I don't really know why he's part of this. He doesn't really belong. And then that is everyone in the 2015 class. So yeah, it's pretty forgettable overall. As I mentioned, there's a small handful of rappers who did some cool stuff, but the majority just did not live up to expectations, and that's why to me it ranks second from last place. So at number 14 here, possibly a very controversial choice depending on who you ask, we have the 2023 freshman class. Now, I clearly don't think that this is the very worst freshman class ever, but since it's so low, you can probably guess that I don't think it's all that amazing either. The roster this time includes Finesse 2 Times, Lola Brooke, Rob 49, Friday, Glorilla, Too Rare, Sleazy World Go, Central C, Real Boston Richie, Lil Tyler, Tia Corinne, and DC the Don. Now, since this class is so new, it's not really a matter of who fell off or who didn't live up to potential, because these guys still have a lot of time to develop as artists, and I think a few will continue to get better and better as the years go on. But my main issue with this list is who should have been included who just weren't, but we'll go in depth on that in a minute. Looking at who did make the list though, I can say before it dropped and I looked into everyone's music, the three names I did recognize were Central C, Glorilla, and DC the Don. Central C and Glorilla both had big social media hits to their name, those being Doja and FNF respectively. I'm not the biggest fan of either personally, and their respective styles can be a little repetitive here and there, but they were big enough to at least get on my radar, and I did recognize them. And then DC the Don had some overlap with the YouTube rap scene, and he did a few collabs and features I did enjoy. I would describe his sound, though, as like a Diet Trippie Redd, who is someone who I'm not the biggest fan of, personally. It's got that rage rap sort of feel, but it's a little less intense. You know, it's kind of like a lesser version of that. His style, his clothes as well, probably the most unique artist from this list that stands out as far as like his fashion and stuff, so I think that's pretty cool. But those are the three that I knew, and I got why they earned a spot on this list. But everybody else, though, I had to look up who they were because I just didn't, know any of these other names. And it's not like I'm, a bitter old head. I put the oldest list from XXL last on this ranking, so it's not like I'm not, tapped into the scene, but I just didn't know who they were. I do like Finesse 2 Times. He probably is, on a technical level, the best rapper on this list in terms of just his raw ability, his voice, his rhyme schemes, and his, Memphis style that really comes out. It's got that grizzly feel to it that I really enjoy. I do like a lot of his stuff, and I do think he deserves a spot here. Friday, as of now, seems like more of a feature artist. All of his biggest songs are with people like Lil Baby or Jay-Z or Chris Brown. They're established artists that are kind of taking him under their wing. He has a song with, of all bands, Swedish House Mafia, which I didn't even know they were still around, but, that song is okay. All of it is just kind of average to good. It's not stuff that I would, go seek out and, you have to hear anything, but it's not, horrible. I think he will develop his sound more, but as of now, I think he's just kind of alright. Rob 49 does have a couple songs that I like, but his sound is overall pretty generic as well. Too Rare made some noise with his song Cupid Remix on TikTok a while back, and he's now just kind of getting seen for some of his other songs, but this dude just gives off such an Urkel energy, I just can't take him seriously, honestly. Lola Brooke is another TikTok favorite with her song Don't Play With It, which to me is pretty average as well. It's kind of imitating a lot of the other female drill out there, and I just think that there's, some other rappers who just do that sound much better than her. Sleazier World Go is my vote for the future one-hit wonder of this roster. Real Boston Richie, despite having the absolute worst cypher verse ever heard on XXL, is pretty average as well. Tia Corinne is definitely the most obscure and the smallest in terms of numbers from this batch, and she also seems to be the least active in terms of putting out music consistently. And then Lil Tyler, I believe, is the youngest freshman to ever make a list, being only 16 years old, and to me it does show because his stuff is definitely below the standard of a lot of the other rappers. He definitely comes off a little bit more nervous and kind of unsure of himself. He just lacks confidence in general. And before anyone asks, yeah, the iconic Law and Order sample being wasted on a guy like this is just, yeah, I can't take it, man. I just have a bias against him for that. But this is just my opinion, of course, and the opinion is from me that this list, while it's not the worst ever, it is pretty average to below average that could have been stronger had they included some other rappers that are currently on the rise. Reportedly, they did contact Ice Spice to be part of this list because she was, the obvious #1 right now, but she reportedly turned it down, so that's not really something you can blame XXL for. I would have recommended they maybe try Pink Pantheress because they had that song Boy's a Liar together, which was huge, and Pink Pantheress seems like someone who has a lot of crossover appeal right now and is very active in a lot of different scenes, including hip-hop. And then my other big snub for this list is BLP Kosher, who is one of my favorites right now. I don't think he's put out a bad song yet. He is definitely one of the most consistent and just most creative rappers in the scene right now. But it's possible that he's still a little too underground for XXL to take notice of. He doesn't really have a huge charting song or a big crossover hit, but the people that love him absolutely love him, and he's got a very unique approach to his style and his, voice and everything. It very much stands out against all the other noise that, hip-hop is making. So yeah, hopefully next year he'll be a little bit more on the map and they'll take notice. But those are just my thoughts on the recent crop of rappers from the 2023 list. Again, I'm not saying it's the absolute worst or anything, but the word I would use to describe this list is pretty underwhelming. So coming up next at number 13, we have the 2018 freshman class. Now, if you ask me, this is easily the most dated list XXL ever put together and has definitely aged the worst out of all the covers, but there are at least a couple rappers here that did make some big moves since its debut 5 years ago. To refresh everyone's memory, the lineup this time around was Ski Mask the Slump God, Lil Pump, Smoke Perp, JID, Stefflon Don, Blackboy JB, YBN Namir, Wi-Fi's Funeral, and Trippie Redd, many of which were very much products of their time. I mean, you have Ski Mask, Lil Pump, Trippie Redd, Smoke Perp, Wi-Fi's Funeral, and Amir right off the bat. I mean, 2/3 of this list all came from that SoundCloud rap era that was just everywhere back then. And a good amount of these people have just disappeared, or in my opinion, have just put out complete trash. Soul Train by YBN, I mean, that was probably the worst song that came out of that scene. Like, it just instantly killed a lot of his momentum, and people just did not take him seriously at all after that. It's just completely trash. Smoke Perp and Lil Pump have tried to come back recently to disappointing results. They've had some mixed results in terms of their quality, and you know, some of their recent songs did kind of tap into that old nostalgia, but most of them just people ignored for the most part. Trippie Redd still puts out a healthy amount of music, but as I mentioned earlier, he's someone who I personally don't think is all that interesting. He's got maybe, you know, 3 or 4 good songs that I have in my rotation, but the rest are pretty bad, and in general, he's just part of that category who I feel like people either love or they hate. Like, there's really no in between with Trippie Redd. Wi-Fi's Funeral, I just haven't heard anyone talk about in years. He totally fell off the map. And then with Ski Mask, he was someone who I really enjoyed when he was hot a few years ago, but he also just completely disappeared. I don't even know if he makes music anymore. He hasn't put out an album in a very long time, so I don't know what he's been up to. Blockboy JB totally fell off after Look Alive came out. He had the Drake feature and then just totally stunted his growth there. Stefflon Don is another one who just completely disappeared. She might still have a following in the UK, since I'm pretty sure that's where she's from, but here in the States at least, she just definitely cooled off. Like, she hasn't done anything in years. And then the one rapper who does save this list from the very bottom though is JID. JID is very talented, very lyrical. He's a great storyteller. He's been part of the Dreamville crew for a while. That's J. Cole's label, and he's done a lot of collabs with Cole and a bunch of the other rappers from that era. The Forever Story, of course, one of the biggest albums from last year. Just a very consistent artist and just has a ton of potential left to show. So to me, he really carries this list, as he's like the one that has the biggest success and is really a good, you know, example of what the freshman list can do for somebody, taking them from the underground and then really propping them up and giving them a spotlight. But pretty much everyone else from this list, except for him, just either totally fell off or just hasn't put anything out in years. And as a whole, this is a very dated list that really hurts its placement on this ranking. Following that, next up at number 12, we have the 2021 freshman class. This one included 42 Dugg, Flo Milli, Moray, Pooh Shiesty, Lakia, Coi Leray, Tusi, Blast, DG, Ruby Rose, and Ian Dior. This is another one of those very recent lists that I think is a good test to see just in the last couple of years what folks have been up to and where they've improved in quality, or where some of them have still kind of remained pretty average, or if some of them just completely fell off the map in a very short amount of time. Starting with the 2 that I think are the big names from this roster, which are Coi Leray and Ian Dior. Coi is someone who people really love to hate on. Like, she's got so much disrespect from people, especially when she first started making noise around this time. But if you ask me, she's really improved since she came out, and in a pretty dramatic way, no less. I still think that No More Parties is a very tedious and slow song. I've never really been a fan of that one, but her new song Players that came out last year has continued to just grow and grow on me. It's one of my favorites right now, and it still gets constant airplay on the radio all the time, so I think she's in a pretty good spot. And then with Ian Dior, he had that massive song with 24K Gold and Mood a few years back. That song was just inescapable. It was easily one of the most popular songs of the year. It might have been the most popular song of the year just as far as stats go. And he was certainly one of my favorites when it came out, because he just had this very reliably solid hook game, and you know, his pop sensibilities I think really played into the commerciality that he carried in a lot of his songs. He does dabble in some other genres, but he doesn't stray too far from that core sound of just good old-fashioned pop rap. And in my opinion, he's one of the strongest from this group, just as far as sustainability and maintaining his momentum throughout the last few years. There's a few people who I liked a lot when they first came up, but then they just kind of stopped putting music out, and I think the biggest example of that is 42 Dugg. I have no idea what he's been up to recently. I know he came up through the Detroit rap scene, so he was kind of a a hometown hero from this list. He had some really big songs with Lil Baby a couple years ago, but nothing that's really gotten quite to that level since. I mean, he just hasn't really put stuff out, and, you know, if he has, like, it just hasn't gotten any mainstream attention, so he just kind of fell off, in my opinion. Pooh Shiesty was another one who had a huge hit with Back in Blood. That was with Lil Durk, and that song was everywhere for a while. He, you know, was just extremely popular and seemed like he had a ton of potential. But then I think he got caught up with some legal issues, and maybe he went to jail at some point. I don't know the exact details, but somewhere in there he was either locked up or he was convicted of something, and he just wasn't able to put any music out as a result. Flo Milli is someone who I get why people like her, but to me her stuff is just very repetitive. She does have plenty of fans though, so I think she's in a good spot. She hasn't fallen off or anything, but her music is just not my cup of tea. Tusi is someone who I see more as a social media guy now, like on TikTok and stuff. I don't think he really does a ton of music. I think he's more focused on like TikTok and Instagram. Aside from the Kendrick album feature that he had, I haven't heard anything from Blast lately. Ruby Rose is another one that pivoted back into social media, and I think she does like OnlyFans or something. I think she's also stopped putting music out. Moray was someone who I really thought was going to be huge. He had like a Rod Wave type of style. It was very like soulful, kind of R&B adjacent, and he had that big song Quicksand that was everywhere. That was one of my favorites when it came out. But as far as I know, the only thing that he's released in a good while, at least from the entire calendar year so far in 2023, was his feature for the Macklemore album that came out, which I thought was really good, but it didn't seem to help, you know, his career or advance him in the spotlight at all. Lakia is the person I know the least amount about and what she's been up to. I just couldn't tell you anything about her. And then last and least, in my opinion, is definitely DDG. DDG is someone who I just can't stand, man. I used to rep him a while back. You know, he's from Michigan. He was part of that YouTube rap scene. He did help bridge the gap between the mainstream and the YouTube scene for a while, but his music is just so unlikable, man. Like, I think everything he's put out is just total garbage. Like, just not a single good song from him. His sampling too is just so egregious. Like, he has this song where he just literally samples the iCarly theme song and he just like freestyles over it. It's just total trash in my opinion. Like, he is definitely one of the more you know, recognizable people on this list, but I just don't think he's very creative. I think his stuff is very generic, and like I said, his sampling sucks. So to me, he is definitely the weak spot on this list. But even still, the general selection is pretty average in my opinion. There's nothing like that's super egregious aside from DDG, but you know, the best of the best here, like Coi Leray and Ian Dior, they're definitely far from the peaks of other lists. So in general, this one is just kind of in that meh tier. Not the worst, but not the best. Following that, we do have the best of the most recent lists, in my opinion, here at number 11, which is going to be the 2022 freshman class. The lineup this time around included Nardo Wick, Sofego, Babyface Ray, Big Scar, Big 30, Cali, Ken the Man, Cochise, Casey, Doechii, Saucy Santana, and Babytron. Now, to me, the big names that come out of this class are going to be Babytron, Cali, Cochise, and Doechii. They've all done a really good job branching out and getting their names out there through TikTok, and to me are such really good personalities here. And my personal favorite from the roster is Babytron. That dude just does not miss. He's got a very interesting flow and cadence. That scam rap style that's big in Detroit right now, he is like kind of the poster child for at the moment. So I think he's going to be, you know, the future superstar from that scene, and is definitely going to bring it to the mainstream once he, you know, gives that big crossover hit. I have a lot of faith in Babytron that he can pull that off. There's just a lot of really good individual songs from the rappers from this list. Like Cochise had that big lyrical Lemonade song with Tell 'Em. Cali had Area Codes, which was big on TikTok. And then Doechii had that big song What It Is. Nardo Wick is another one who had a lyrical Lemonade placement with Who Wants Smoke with a bunch of the features, which was really solid. So there's just a lot of people on this list that have, you know, that one big song right now that is kind of carrying the momentum because, again, this is really new. And then there's some people who just have a really interesting sound to them or just a really interesting style, like Saucy Santana, who I've consistently been impressed with anytime he pops up on a feature or in a cypher. He's always bringing heat. Sofego is someone who's kind of part of the remaining SoundCloud rap scene that slowly kind of overlapped into the 2020s. In my opinion, he does have a very unique, sound and sort of style to him, but he doesn't really have a lot of lyrical substance. It is kind of style over substance in his case, but he's definitely not the worst part of this list, or even, rap scene as a whole. He's still doing his thing. Babyface Ray is another Detroit artist who's kind of been on the grind for a long time now. He started putting stuff out in the mid-2010s, so, he's just taken his time. He's been very patient to get into the spotlight. He does have a lot of local influence here. He's definitely paved the way for the Detroit sound, but in my opinion, there's just a lot of people that do that sound better than him, and, he's kind of a little generic in my opinion, even though he is a very important figure within the local scene. He just doesn't do it as well as some people that came after him and kind of advanced his particular way of doing things. Big Scar unfortunately passed away quite recently, only a few months after this list came out, so he's another example who didn't really get a chance to evolve and, use the exposure to elevate his music. In my opinion, it was solid, but it wasn't anything that I would immediately have to, cop if he put out a new album or something. I wouldn't turn it off per se, but it's just not super mind-blowing either. And then the last couple people here, Ken the Man and KC, are the two that I think are the weakest of this bunch because I've just never been that impressed with that material. It's very in one ear and out the other sort of style for me. But as a whole, I think this is a pretty alright class. There is a lot to like here that give a good optimistic look into where these artists are going and where rap is going in the future. And I think in a few years, this one is going to grow on a lot of people. I think there's a good strong case that this is going to be the one that has a lot of the big superstars who are going to use their one or two big social media songs to really advance themselves in the pipeline and not become one-hit wonders. All in all though, it is just still a little too new for me to give it a top 10 placement here, so as it stands now, it'll rank just outside of it at number 11. So as we delve into the top 10 here, the next list to go over at number 10 is going to be the 2009 freshman class. As one of the oldest classes, this one features a good amount of people who carried and really helped develop the rap game into what we know it is now, and a good amount who just totally dropped the ball as far as being able to sell themselves as sustainable entertainers. Going over the roster, it includes Wale, B.O.B., Charles Hamilton, Asher Roth, Corey Guns, Blue, Mickey Fax, Ace Hood, Currency, and Kid Cudi. And of course, out of those names, Kid Cudi easily stands out as the king of this roster. His Man on the Moon series, one of the most critically acclaimed runs in hip-hop, and then teaming up with Kanye lately for Kids See Ghost. I mean, come on, man. Cudi has absolutely earned his flowers for being super creative and conceptual. Definitely an extremely easy pick for the best out of this bunch. B.O.B. is a very nostalgic rapper to me and someone who has definitely earned his spot as far as the early 2010s pop rap scene goes. I mean, there's still radio stations here all these years later that play Nothing on You and Airplanes, which is very impressive. Lately, he has had some controversies that I think have turned people away from him, and his newer music definitely doesn't come anywhere close to his old stuff, but there is a lot of nostalgia for him, and I think in general he is just a very fun guy. He doesn't take it super seriously like some people, because transitioning into Wale, I think that's one of the reasons why Wale never really caught on with a lot of people, was he just took it too seriously. His music, his attitude, it just came off like someone who was very, egotistical at times and, almost a little arrogant in some ways, and I think that was just a big turnoff. His music is solid, but it's just not something that I'd seek out if I was, going to a party or something. I wouldn't turn to Wale for that. His fandom, though, still very solid, and he's still putting out music quite consistently, so as far as the list goes, he is one of the stronger people here. Charles Hamilton, Mickey Fax, and Corey Guns all fell off very hard. Couldn't name you anything they've been up to. Ace Hood has a couple tracks that still hold up and are pretty nostalgic to me, including Bugatti, which is always been super tough, man. Like, come on, that song is an absolute banger. He hasn't put out much recently, but I do think that he cemented himself a long time ago and that people still have a lot of respect for him, so I think just off of his legacy and off of nostalgia, he's carried through, over the last few years as well. Asher Roth is definitely a one-hit wonder. And then the last couple of guys here are Blue and Currency, and I'd say they're fairly underrated. They're pretty important to the underground scene. They really helped shape it into what it is now, and they're still putting out very consistent music. They're very critically acclaimed, they have a diehard fandom, but the only issue with them is that they never really crossed over into the mainstream. Again, they're kind of more on the underground side of things. So in that sense, it could be argued that they don't really help the list because they never really had the same name recognition. But as a whole, I think that the 2009 list is quite solid, and obviously Kid Cudi being the standout, like I said, is definitely one of the strongest peaks from any of the lists that we've covered so far. But the backing cast here is pretty good as well, and all around, there's no one who's like totally awful. Like, I think this has a pretty high floor all considered, and it has, a relatively high ceiling, but there's just a lot of people who are on some of the other lists that do outshine them, and as a whole, it ranks at number 10. Next up here at the number 9 spot is going to be the 2014 freshman class. This one in particular is one of the biggest classes that was ever put together, and I believe did hold the record for the most amount of rappers of any XXL class for quite a while, with 12 in total. And the rappers in question were Chance the Rapper, Rich Homie Quan, Isaiah Rashad, Ty Dolla $ign, Lil Durk, Kevin Gates, Troy Ave, Vic Mensa, John Connor, Lil Bibby, Jaron Benton, and August Alsina. To me, the main standout of this batch has to be Lil Durk, which is interesting because if you'd ask me who was the biggest rapper or the best rapper from this list, say like 5 years ago, Durk probably wouldn't even been one of the first 3 people I would have picked, because he took a while for him to find his groove and to carve out an audience. But once he did, man, he was unstoppable. He always had buzz in the Chicago scene, but now in the past like 4 or 5 years, he's really popped off with a lot of big singles and a lot of guest features. Right now, he's got that big song All My Life with J. Cole, which is probably going to be the biggest rap song of the year. It's just unbelievably good, and it's definitely one of my favorites. So no doubt in my mind, Durk has earned his spot on this list and is definitely one of the biggest rappers that has come out of the freshman pipeline. Another person who I really enjoy from this list is Chance the Rapper. I know Chance has lost a lot of respect from people when The Big Day came out, but personally, I've always liked his stuff. I've always thought he was very genuine, very down to earth. His early albums still hold up. He's done some really good features and guest spots as well in the last few years, and he's worked with some really interesting artists that, you wouldn't expect to work well together with him, like Madonna and Justin Bieber. I thought he had some really good features on some of their songs. I think just in terms of recognizability, he definitely is one of the stronger people from this list, but there are, some hardcore fans out there who just flat out don't like him anymore. So I guess it depends on who you ask, but to me, I think he could make a comeback if he wanted to, so I'm not going to count him out quite yet. Kevin Gates is someone who I do enjoy a few songs by, but to me, I feel like a lot of people just don't take him seriously. He kind of comes off more of a meme nowadays, but I personally enjoy his style and a lot of his more aggressive takes on rap. Rich Homie Quan and Ty Dolla $ign I think are good, but not great. I've always viewed them more as feature artists. They work well in small doses to me. Ty Dolla $ign, I think his biggest song is Psycho with Post Malone. I don't think he has like a huge solo hit that really cemented him as, the main standout artist. He's always been more of a feature guy. I do enjoy a lot of their stuff, but I don't think that a lot of folks out there are like super gung-ho about him. Isaiah Rashad is very talented and is one of those guys who you'll see be brought up in a lot of online circles about hip-hop, like Reddit or Twitter. People that are like really deep into the culture of it, and people who really know a lot about the genre really respect him. But again, he's never really had a big breakout album that took him to the next level on the charts or anything. He's a steady rapper that's doing his thing for a fandom that's very dedicated, and you can't really hate that, but I wish he had more of like a mainstream presence because he is super talented. August Alsina is more known now for his like association with Will Smith and Jada Pinkett's like love triangle, entanglement, affair sort of thing, whatever you want to call it. I don't think he's really known for his music at all. Troy Ave looked like he had some potential, but then he got caught up with some legal issues that really stunted his growth. He had the whole Irvine Plaza situation that just, really sort of shook him up, and he just kind of flaked after that. And he also got in that feud with Joey Badass, which I think a lot of people just, kind of lost some respect for him because they just like Joey Badass more. So there's that. Jaron Benton and John Connor, I just couldn't name any anything by. Vic Mensa is a total asshole if you ask me. Like, I think he lost a lot of fans after he made those comments about X, and people just didn't want to support him after that. His music also just isn't that interesting. It's pretty boring if you ask me. And then finally, Lil Bibby is an interesting case because he is technically known for being part of the music scene, and he has had a lot of success in that, just not for making music. He's definitely more of a like manager and like a label mogul sort of guy. He started his own record label, and he signed Juice WRLD and the Kid Laroi, and has obviously had a lot in doing with their success, and you know, as sort of a coach and like a mentor to them. So you can say he is one of the best from this list because he has a ton of success and is a big name within the scene, but he's just not known for his own rapping ability and his own skills, because I don't think he's put anything out for at least like since like 2017, 2018, since he started really focusing in on the management stuff. So it's kind of debatable if that hurts or helps this list in a way, but to me, he does prop it up because, I mean, that is a pretty important role for, you know, a lot of people to take on. And overall, the list isn't too shabby. I think Durk, Isaiah Rashad, Chance, Lil Bibby, like there's definitely some heavy hitters here that really do help it up and place it in the top 10. Following that, we have one of the most divisive lists that XXL ever put together, and one that I see quite often is placed at the very bottom of the list, which is going to be the 2012 freshman class. There's a lot of rappers here that are very polarizing, either musically or personality-wise as well, and it's very hard for people to accept the fact that they have very successful albums and stuff, like as far as numbers go, because there's just a lot of people who, you know, hip-hop fans just don't like here. But again, this is all just based on opinion, and to me, I think this has a lot more good rappers on it than bad rappers, so let's break it down here. The rappers on this list were Future, Kid Ink, Danny Brown, French Montana, Macklemore, Don Tripp, Machine Gun Kelly, Hopsin, Iggy Azalea, and Roscoe Dash. Future, right off the bat, is the biggest rapper from this list. He's one of the most impactful rappers of the last decade or so. He is kind of like the granddad of trap in a lot of ways, and he's been around for so long. That sound he was doing back in like 2012, 2013, right around when this list came out, is kind of now like the default sound of what rap is. Like, it's pretty wild to think that he lived up to the name of being an XXL freshman and to his own name of being a very important influence to the future of rap. Someone else who had a ton of influence in his respective subgenre was Hopsin, who for that horrorcore type of style is just absolutely huge. Hopsin has always been a love him or hate him type of rapper, and he's always been put in that category. For the people that love him though, they are as ride or die as fans could be. He still has millions and millions of streams on YouTube and Spotify and such all these years later. So he's one of those examples that I said where even though people don't enjoy him, you just can't deny the numbers. Machine Gun Kelly, I think, is in that same boat too, because he also has a lot of haters, but his numbers are rock solid right now. He's arguably even more popular than he was when this list came out, because he kind of strayed away from rap and started doing the rock and pop punk stuff, which has been very lucrative for him. I've defended him on my channel before, so I'm sure a lot of you guys know that I do support him and that I think he has good songs in both the rap and rock genres. And to me, I think he's lived up to the standard of the XXL freshman title. Macklemore is another one who I really love personally, and as someone who I've always supported throughout the years, ever since he came out in 2012 with The Heist and had those massive songs Thrift Shop and Same Love and We Can't Stop. I mean, those still get a lot of radio attention to this day. I don't think Macklemore is someone who people like flat out hate. I don't think there's like that super like aggressive like tone that people have when his name is brought up or anything, but I think they just don't have a lot of respect for him. I think ironically when he won the Grammy for The Heist around this time was when people started changing their tune on him because they felt like he didn't deserve it and stuff. But even still to this day, I mean, he still has a pretty loyal fandom that, will support him with all his new releases. I talked about earlier, he put out an album earlier this year, which I really enjoyed, and, it reviewed pretty well. It had a lot of positive, stuff from critics. So even though he's not going to ever get to that level that he once was, I think Macklemore, has a pretty good safety net behind him. I don't think he necessarily needs it in order to remain successful or relevant. And honestly, I don't even think he wants to be that big anymore. Like, I think he's very down to earth. He's very level-headed. As long as he's got a good fandom that supports his messaging and his music and stuff, I think he's in a good spot. You know, I think that'll make him happy, give him his satisfaction. He doesn't need to be in the spotlight 24/7 like some people do. French Montana is another kind of meme more than anything. Like, I don't think people hate him, but they don't really seek him out either. He's just always kind of been like a DJ Khaled type. He's kind of more a producer. I didn't even know he rapped, to be honest with you. But his stuff, you know, it's just kind of okay. It's not anything super special. He's just kind of in that middle ground for me. Kid Ink is okay, and he's kind of like Ty Dolla $ign, where he's more of a feature artist. He had that big song with Fifth Harmony a little while back, and it's got like 2 billion views. So again, he has the numbers, but I would never classify him as like a main rapper, like a main character, you know, or anything. He's definitely more of a side guy. Danny Brown is very interesting, and his music is very experimental, and you know, it's very weird compared to a lot of other stuff. And again, his numbers do support it. His critical support is huge. I don't think casual people really, you know, connect it or resonate with it as much as the critics do, but he does have, you know, a very diehard fandom as well. There's a lot of people who really love that more experimental sound. He's just kind of in the middle for me. I don't hate his music, but I never really seek it out. The two that have by far the least recognizability to them are Don Tripp and Roscoe Dash. They're just total nobodies. And then to finish up here, we have Iggy Azalea, who is someone that certain folks act like is like the worst thing to ever happen to hip hop, and she's like a total fucking like cancerous, like she should just disappear forever. People just talk on her so badly, and it's like you almost feel bad for her because I don't think she deserves that level of hate, you know. I don't think that she's that bad. I think that some of her music is pretty solid overall, but again, it's not really stuff I would seek out. You know, if you turned it on, I wouldn't immediately turn it off, but it's not something that, you know, I would go out of my way to find. And honestly, I think the reason why people say she fell off is just because she stopped making music. Like, she had a pretty successful run up until that point, around like, you know, the early 2020s, when I think she started transitioning into like OnlyFans and stuff, and music was just kind of put on the back burner for her. But if she wanted to, she probably still could be very successful in the scene. She just doesn't seem like someone who wants to do that as her primary, you know, mode of entertainment. So those are the few weak spots here, but on the whole, this is a pretty solid list in my opinion. It's definitely far from the bottom like some people act. Like, I don't know why people say this is the worst list. It definitely has a lot of people who have lived up to the hype as far as numbers go, like I said. But to me, it is pretty, you know, just in that middle tier again. It's not amazing, but it's, you know, not the all-time best that it could be like some of these lists. So it'll stick right in the middle here at number 8 for now. So coming off of that one, we at number 7 here have what I would say is the most overhated list of all of them, even more than the list of 2012, and that is going to be the 2017 freshman class. I sincerely do not understand the gripes that people have with this one, especially in these ranked lists. Everyone seems to have this one super low as well, which is just wild to me. Obviously, everyone's going to have their own opinions, so it's totally fine if you disagree, but this is one of my personal faves out of the bunch, and as a result, I have it pretty high up here in the ranking. The classmates of 2017 were Kamaya, A Boogie With A Hoodie, PNB Rock, Playboi Carti, Amine, Cap G, Kyle, Ugly God, Made in Tokyo, and XXX Tentacion. RIP to X and PNB Rock, of course, right off the bat. Very, very sad to see that they didn't really have a chance to expand on their sound and evolve in a lot of the other ways that their other contemporaries were able to. X is probably the biggest what if of the modern generation, because even in just a few short years and just a couple of albums, he became the biggest rapper in the world seemingly overnight, which is just crazy to me how big his come up was. History, I think, is going to be very, very positive to him looking back on it. Even despite his controversies, he was just too impactful and important to ignore. Playboi Carti is probably my favorite out of everyone listed here. Die Lit and Whole Lotta Red are just incredible projects. Certainly another love him or hate him type of rapper, but to me, he is very influential and is one of those who's going to go down as an important figure to this modern generation and kind of the sound SoundCloud rap as well. I don't think he was like super established in that scene, but he did have a lot of influence over it just throughout the late 2010s, 2020s. I think history is going to look back on him with really positive sentiment as well. A Boogie is someone who I've heard has a huge cult following in New York, which is where he's from, and he does have a lot of fun singles, so I definitely have no gripes about him being here. Amine is very underrated. He's been someone who's very consistent, and every time he drops an album or a big single, it always gets the online hip-hop circles buzzing. Kyle is definitely a one-hit wonder with I Spy, but that song is still a lot of fun in my opinion. Made in Tokyo is another one who's super underrated to me. I think he's got a lot of really interesting beat choices. His production's really cool. He's got some really cool collabs over the years. Just a very fun rapper. Ugly God is another one-hit wonder, to be honest with you, but he is another one that's just super fun and can be very funny at times too. He's just a really funny guy. And then the couple people who didn't really live up to the hype, and I do feel like bring this list down a little bit, are Cab G and Kamaya. I just haven't heard anyone bring them up in a long time, and they just haven't made any noise in recent years. But even outside of those couple weak spots, like, this is a very, very good list in my opinion. This is definitely one of the strongest ones. I genuinely do not understand why people don't like it. There's definitely some people who are divisive here, like Playboy Cardi, for example, but most of them, I think, as far as numbers go, as far as their success and, just their momentum in the scene, I think this is a rock solid group that deserves its flowers. So looking ahead here at the number 6 spot, we have another controversial take of mine ranking this one arguably so low, because this one is considered to be one of the best that XXL ever put together, and I have it just outside of the top 5, which is going to be the 2013 Freshman List. The roster for this one included Schoolboy Q, Trinidad James, Joey Badass, Ab-Soul, Logic, Action Bronson, Kurt Cobain, Travis Scott, Dizzy Wright, Angel Hayes, and Chief Keef. Now this one, I would argue, has a lot of very technical, old school style rappers who are extremely talented, and those include Joey Badass, Schoolboy Q, Ab-Soul, and Action Bronson. Those guys are all very good at rapping on like an objective level, I would say, and some obviously have released more than others over the years. But personally, there are some other styles of rap that are more heavily prominent on the other XXL lists that I think are just more interesting or just a little bit personally better than that old school, more lyrical style. I think some of the other lists have a little bit more diversity on them that help it stand out more than this one, because that is primarily the main sort of subgenre or category that this list occupies, that I think is a little overrated at times, but those guys are still extremely important. The big two here that I do love from this list, though, are going to be Travis Scott and Chief Keef. They absolutely deserve every ounce of respect and critical acclaim that they've gotten over the years. They are extremely influential in the trap scene, and Travis Scott, I mean, come on, he is Travis friggin' Scott. He's one of the biggest rappers of all time. Came back with Utopia this year, which is, I think, the biggest album of the year so far. Like, not even just in rap, just biggest period. It did 500,000 first week, which is just unheard of, and he hadn't released something since Astroworld back in 2018, so it had been a long while too, and he can still put out an album and it does crazy numbers. Like, Travis Scott is an absolute sensation. There's a few people here who are definitely one-hit wonders, like Kurt Cobain and Trinidad James. I don't think they're bad per se, but obviously they just don't compare to some of the other people on this list. Dizzy Wright was someone who got signed with Hobson early on, and he did get some traction, I think, but it just wasn't enough to really carry him into the next level or, have him be very sustainable for a long time. And he's also complained about label issues and stuff, so I think that sort of stunted his growth at, putting out music in a very consistent manner. Angel Hayes is someone who I did hear a little bit back in the day for, and I do enjoy her sound, but as far as name recognition, a lot of people definitely overshadow her, and I don't think a lot of hip-hop heads would know something off the top of their heads by her. I think they would have to look into her a little bit. And then the last person to mention here would be Logic, who is someone who I feel like everybody you ask has a very different opinion on Logic. Some people think he's amazing, some people think he's absolute garbage, some people think that he's super consistent and he's never released a bad project, some people think he's extremely hit or miss and, he'll go back and forth as far as his albums being good or bad. Like, everyone's just all over the place with him. There doesn't seem to be a clear consensus on his sound. Personally, I do enjoy a lot of his music. I think he is a very important and influential person in the scene. He's done a lot of styles very well. He does help this list stand taller in my eyes, but I don't blame you at all for disagreeing there, because if you ask me, there are some people that do overshadow him, and it could be a case that, his sound is just not for everyone. That said though, as a whole, the 2013 list is one of the most iconic that XXL put together and does have a lot of really fantastic rappers, but like I mentioned, it is just a touch overrated as a whole, and it barely misses the top 5 because to me, the last 5 lists we have to go over are all at like a 9 out of 10 or higher in terms of quality and accuracy, and honestly, depending on the day, you could have these last 5 in pretty much any order you wanted to from this point on, where they're just all incredible. But beginning with number 5, we have the 2011 freshman class. The roster of 2011 is one of the most praised groups that XXL ever had together in one cover, and for good reason, because the lineup included Meek Mill, Big Crit, Sci-Hi the Prince, Lil Twist, Yellow Wolf, Fred the Godson, Mac Miller, YG, Lil B, Kendrick Lamar, and Diggy Simmons. So many great rappers in this batch, starting off with, of course, Kendrick Lamar. I mean, come on, it's Kendrick. I don't think I need to say anything for him. His work speaks for itself. Up there with him, I would put Meek Mill in terms of just commercial success and popularity. He is an extremely popular rapper who has, his fair share of peaks and valleys, but has always managed to come out of it stronger. And then to round out the top 3, I gotta put Mac Miller in there, man. Mac Miller is such a good rapper, and another tragic loss that we had, passing away so early in his career. Even just for the short amount of time he was alive for, he had just such an incredible growth, man. He went from these very silly, goofy, songs about just like chilling, smoking weed and stuff, just like very basic subject matter, and then transitioning that into very artistic, conceptual albums like Swimming, which I think was his best selling, even though it was the final one he made. So he gets a huge thumbs up for me. And then the next tier after that would be people like Sci-Hi the Prince, Big Crit, Fred the Godson, and YG. Those guys are all super solid. A lot of them would go on to work behind the scenes on stuff, like Sci-Hi the Prince, for example, worked on Astroworld by Travis Scott. He was one of the songwriters, and then he also worked on a lot of Kanye's albums, which obviously Kanye, one of the biggest rappers there. So Sci-Hi deserves a mention here just for being, sort of a mentor and someone who people could rely on to improve their work. Fred the Godson, Big Crit, they're extremely talented as well. Fred the Godson, I think another one who actually passed away quite recently due to COVID, in fact, which, very sad loss there. But they're extremely talented, very much in the underground scene. Big Crit sort of repping the South. YG had a lot of fun music as well. Like, he wasn't ever the most serious rapper, but you could just have a ton of fun with him. Lil B, in my opinion, is awesome, man. Probably the one person from any of these lists who, doesn't really give a shit about what people think. Like, he's not afraid to go against the grain and just do stuff that's very weird and experimental and, wacky and stuff. He was extremely ahead of his time too, using, the internet in a way that nobody had really seen before, and using that to advance himself in the music scene. Yellow Wolf is okay in my opinion, but he really didn't have much momentum after he left Shady Records, which was Eminem's label. And then Diggy Simmons and Lil Twist are the two that most would agree are far below everyone else here. Twist falling off pretty hard after getting signed with Lil Wayne's label and then just not following up with anything. And then Diggy Simmons basically stopped making music to pursue acting, which actually worked out for him quite well. He's one of the leads on Grownish, which is the spinoff of Blackish, which was really popular. So his career is, solid right now. It's in a good spot, but he just doesn't do much rapping anymore. So for the context of this ranking and the lists, he's definitely one of the weaker people from this batch. But outside of them, this is a great list, and as I mentioned, you could easily argue as this whole entire 2011 class is the best of all of them. I've seen a lot of people put this at number 1. You could rearrange, again, this top 5 in any order, and just for, Kendrick, Meek, and Mac Miller, like those 3 really prop it up to a very high level. But the next list I have here is, I think, slightly better, and the one that is kind of like a sister class to the 2011 issue, which is going to be the 2010 class. These two lists are extremely comparable to each other because the top three of them are extremely similar in terms of their quality and their influence on each other. The top three for this list just barely edges it out in my opinion, but I'll go more in detail on that in a second. So as a refresher, the 2010 class included J. Cole, Pill, Nipsey Hussle, Freddie Gibbs, Big Sean, Wiz Khalifa, OJ the Juice Man, J-Rock, Fashawn, and Donis. And to me, the top three of this batch are going to be J. Cole, Wiz Khalifa, and Big Sean. Comparably to Kendrick, Meek, and Mac Miller, I think this trio just comes out ahead just by a hair, and it's very, very close, of course, and, you know, it comes down to personal preference, but to me, the three of them just have a more unique sound, and I just prefer, you know, them to the, you know, other three from the 2011 list. But it is very, very tight, and that's why I have this list just slightly ahead of the 2011 one, but again, it comes down to personal preference, so feel free to debate in the comments as far as who you like better. But to me, I mean, J. Cole, man, he's another one that you really don't have to say much for. Tons of people have him as their #1 favorite rapper for good reason, as he's just incredibly consistent. He's just a terrific rapper. He's been killing it this year with his guest appearance on All My Life, as I mentioned earlier. This dude is just unstoppable for real. And looking back on it, it's pretty interesting that he got picked for this list at the time, because when, you know, this list debuted, all he had was a couple mixtapes and one charting song. So to see the contrast to what he's done since then is, of course, really amazing, and to see that evolution is just incredible. Wiz Khalifa has some really fun music that's just really fun to relax to, stuff that you can just zone out to and forget about your day with. I've always been a fan of his style. And then, of course, See You Again being, I think, statistically the most viewed rap song in history on YouTube helps his case as far as being one of the top three. And then Big Sean as well is someone who, again, is really fun, and being from Michigan, he's a hometown favorite here. He still gets constant radio play all these years later. I think Big Sean has a very diverse catalog that pretty much works for any scenario or any context. You know, if you're at a party, if you're just by yourself at home and you just want to listen to something that's very dense and lyrical, if you're out on a date with somebody, you know, he's got music for every occasion. Nipsey Hussle is another what-if scenario because he passed away right around the time when his big breakthrough moment was happening. And, you know, it's just a bummer to think about because he was super talented and obviously had a lot of industry support behind him. He would always get, you know, guest features on his songs, the hottest rappers that would come and, you know, give him a verse. But unfortunately, he just wasn't able to capitalize off of it because he did pass away, and he wasn't able to get it to the next level. But again, I think people are going to look back on him very fondly because his stuff is genuinely fantastic. Freddie Gibbs and J-Rock have always been super consistent critical darlings. They're not going anywhere anytime soon. And then everyone left, like OJ the Juice Man, Pill, Fashawn, Donis, they kind of just came and went. They're pretty irrelevant nowadays. But this list has so many other killer artists that I can forgive them for a few unknowns here. This one is rock solid, which is wild to think that there are three that I still have left to show you guys that are better. Beginning with the bronze medalist of all the XXL lists, the 2019 class. This is one of my all-time favorites due to how often I come back to this one and rewatch the ciphers and the freestyles from this year, and just how nostalgic this era of hip-hop is to me, and the stuff that was popular around this time, how it basically permanently seeped into my brain. The lineup from the 2019 class had on it Comethazine, Tierra Whack, DaBaby, Lil Mosey, Roddy Ricch, Cordae, YK Osiris, Rico Nasty, Gunna, Blueface, and Megan Thee Stallion. And to me, the best overall here is going to be Megan Thee Stallion. I've talked about her plenty of times on my channel, how much I love her music, extremely catchy and fun, as well as just having a ton of replay value to me, her big songs that I've never gotten sick of personally. Amazing performer, if you ask me. Gunna is another one who, without question, has lived up to the hype as a certified hitmaker. He just came back huge with Fuck You Mean from this year, which is one of the biggest songs right now. Gunna has a proven track record of putting out fan favorites year after year after year. Believe me when I say it's going to be a very, very long time till he's forgotten about. Tierra Whack is super underrated. Her music videos are very creative. She's a very conceptual artist, just has a lot of artistry to her sound and to her performances. performances that you just don't see that often. Cordae is another one who I think is extremely talented, very gifted rapper, probably the best lyrical rapper on this entire list, and he's doing his thing. He's still selling very well. Lil Mosey definitely has some fun songs, but I wouldn't say he's like a generational talent or anything. He is probably a step down from most of these guys, but again, he still sells well. He had that big song Blueberry Faygo a couple years back that was really huge, so he's doing his thing. DaBaby and Roddy Ricch, I know a lot of people like to say they fell off, but I think that both of them can make a comeback. I mean, you got to remember, DaBaby, especially around this time when this list came out, was everywhere. He was so dominant. You couldn't go anywhere without hearing a DaBaby song, whether it was Suge or Rockstar or Babysitter or Bop or any of those massive singles he had. Like, DaBaby just dominated the rap game for so long. And then Roddy Ricch also had just a slew of hits back in the day. He was just extremely popular. Roddy Ricch is still a very likable guy, but his music has just gotten a little more generic as time has gone on. He's, some people have said he's like sold out and stuff. I personally don't believe it, but I think Roddy Ricch could make a comeback if he wanted to. Same thing with DaBaby, but definitely as far as nostalgia goes, and like I said, this era of hip-hop, they just had it on lock, so I think for that they deserve a mention here. Comethazine was one of my all-time favorites when this list came out. I would listen to Comethazine all the time, and had you asked me this back in 2019, I think I would have said he was probably my top 3 for this list. But Comethazine is definitely the one person who I would argue fell off the most just because he hasn't put anything out. I haven't heard a single song from him in years. I have no idea what he's been up to, if he's even making music anymore. Comethazine just totally disappeared. Rico Nasty is someone who I do appreciate, but I'm not the biggest fan of personally, just because her sound is not that interesting. I think there's a lot of people who do it better than her, that sort of aggressive, angsty sort of style. Her look, her, outfits and stuff just visually are very fun, but, as far as the music goes, I don't think it holds up quite to the level of her performances or her music videos or anything. But she still has a very loyal fandom. She's still doing her thing. And then the last couple people to mention would be Blueface and YK Osiris, who personally I think are just trash, honestly. I'm just not a fan of either one of them. But they're still doing their thing. They have, a bit of social media clout, and they've been chasing that. I think YK Osiris kind of, transitioned to being more of an Instagram personality, and Blueface is doing his little reality show sort of thing. I think it's on OnlyFans or something. I'm not 100% sure, but I think he's following that, and that's very popular for them. So as far as a fall off goes, the only person that I would argue from this whole list is probably Comethazine, but everybody else is rock solid here. This is easily one of the peak lists from XXL. Very nostalgic, extremely diverse as far as the sounds and the styles here. This is an all-time favorite of mine. But there are a couple left to go over here, beginning with my runner-up, which, as I mentioned before, with the 2010 and the 2011 lists being sort of similar and almost sister lists to each other, I think that this one is also a sister list to the 2019 class, and that is going to be the 2020 Freshman List. This list consisted of Polo G, Chica, Annalie Choppa, Jack Harlow, Lil Keed, Lil TJ, Fabio Foreign, Cowboy, Rod Wave, Baby Keem, 24K Golden, and Lotto. And man, talk about a stacked list here for the modern generation. I think almost every single one of these guys, maybe except for one again that we'll get into, has just proven themselves to be absolutely incredible and super talented. Starting off with my favorite of the bunch, which is Polo G for sure. I'm a huge Polo G fan. Absolutely just incredible talent there. Very interesting sound, very interesting lyrics. He's a great storyteller, great performer, very emotional. Just an all-around really successful rapper that I think is going to be around for a very long time. Another person who I think is cementing himself, even though he's only been around for a few years, is Baby Keem. I'm going to put my money on it right now that Baby Keem is going to be the next big Kendrick or J. Cole of the 2020s. I think he's going to be the most dominant rapper. When we look back on this list in 10-15 years, I think he's going to be the one standout who just absolutely blew everybody away just of how talented he is. He's going to be the award winner. He's going to be the one that everybody outside of the hip-hop game recognizes for just being extremely talented. Baby Keem has it on lock, man, with the melodic blue. That album album just absolutely blew me away and just, totally cemented himself in the modern generation. So Baby Keem is another absolute winner here. Rod Wave, I mean, come on, Rod Wave has one of the most die-hard loyal fandoms. Like, Rod Wave fans are a different breed, man. You ask them, they will ride or die for that man every single time. He's a very talented rapper. I wouldn't argue against it. Personally, I think that his stuff works best in small doses. I don't really like listening to a full album of his because it's a little repetitive at times, but I can't deny the talent, and of course his fans, like, they're gonna carry him all the way through for the entire decade. Another person that has just an absolutely massive run right now is Lotto. She just commercially, I would argue, is like the most successful rapper out of this whole bunch. Huge hit singles like Seven and Lottery and Big Energy. Like, she's just dominating the Billboard charts right now, so she is totally set for a long time. 24kGoldn is someone who I really enjoy personally. He was one of my favorites when this list dropped, and I still think he has a lot of momentum there. Of course, I mentioned that song Mood earlier when we were talking about Ian Dior, but 24kGoldn is a very talented rapper. He's a lot of fun. He's very humble. He has a lot of personality to him. I think the one thing that sort of sets him apart is he is a little more pop-oriented with some of his stuff, so that could be an advantage or a disadvantage depending on if that's your style or not, but personally, I really like him. And I think in general, he's just a very fun personality, so I think that's going to carry him for a long while here. Same thing with Jack Harlow. Jack Harlow is someone who a lot of people like to trash because they think, again, he's more in that pop category. He's a little corny at times, but I personally like Jack Harlow. He just seems like a very fun, down-to-earth guy that just, is always cracking jokes. He just has good energy about him. Jack Harlow is someone who, more or less maybe isn't as focused on, the music all the time, maybe just being a general personality. He's kind of stepped outside of music lately. He was on SNL, he hosted, and he was in the reboot of White Man Can't Jump. He was one of the leads in that. So he might not be as focused on music, compared to some of his contemporaries, but just a general entertainer. He's definitely at his peak right now. He's on a hot streak, so I think he's going to also carry himself very, very far. Emily Chapa was someone who definitely had a lot of potential back in the day, but he's kind of fallen off a little bit. He definitely just doesn't release as much as he used to. I still enjoy a lot of his stuff, but I could argue why, some people find him a little repetitive or a little boring at times. Lil TJ is another one who just hasn't really put much out lately, but he is a very talented rapper. The last big song he had was that song Call on My Phone, which was, I think, around like 2021, a couple years ago now. But that song was huge, and, here in Detroit at least, it was played on like every radio station constantly. Like, it was pretty inescapable for a while. But Lil TJ, I think, will always kind of be in the shadow of Polo G. They came up together and, they have a lot of songs together and stuff. And I just think Polo has been, way more consistent and just put himself on a higher pedestal lately. So I don't know if that's going to necessarily carry over to Lil TJ or people are going to forget about him. I still like him, but like I said, he just hasn't released that much music lately, so that's something to look out for. Chica is someone who doesn't really have a lot of commercial success, but she is incredibly talented, probably the most underrated rapper of this entire bunch. She is extremely creative, super lyrical, like dense, type of storytelling there. If you've never seen her Tiny Desk, I highly recommend it. It's probably my favorite Tiny Desk performance of all time, an absolute must-watch. And then that leaves us with the three people that I think are kind of on the weaker side of this list, beginning with Fabio Foreign, who, to me at least, is very generic. I don't think that Fabio is necessarily a terrible rapper, but he's just never someone I've seeked out. To me, I think if Pop Smoke, had been fortunate to make this list before he passed away, then it would obviously be a lot better in that case. But Pop Smoke is one of those what-if situations, as we've been discussing, where, it's tough to gauge how much momentum he would have had in this current generation, and, in the last couple years, how things have changed a little bit since his come up. And Fabio Foreign, is a decent substitute, but I don't think anyone is like absolutely, craving to hear Fabio Foreign. He doesn't really stand out as a personality. Like I said, he's just kind of generic, just kind of average in my opinion. He doesn't bring the list down per se, but he definitely doesn't help it either. Lil Keed, unfortunately, is another one that passed away very, very young. I think only like a year or a year and a half after this list debuted. To me, his music wasn't that interesting, to be honest, but, you never know. Again, it's kind of another what-if situation, because he could have had, a tremendous growth, someone like Mac Miller, and totally changed his sound, but but unfortunately we'll just never know, because that's just sometimes what happens, you know. But low-key, you know, he definitely had a fandom, and it was obviously a very sad moment when he did pass. And then to me, the worst person on this list in terms of quality and his, you know, contributions to making this a really solid, you know, group of rappers here is Cowboy. Cowboy is basically the dictionary definition of a fall off here. He had one huge song back in the day, Envy Me, and then just never touched the charts again. Like, he just completely disappeared. Don't know what he's been up to, don't know if he releases any music anymore, but he just totally fell off the map. So he's definitely the weakest in my opinion. But literally outside of him and, you know, maybe Fabio a little bit, everybody else on this list is rock solid here and just absolutely killing it right now. Like I said, Polo G, Rod Wave, Baby Keem, Lotto, they're like the main ones that I think are going to be extremely successful in the future, especially Baby Keem, who, like I said, I think is going to be the top dog from this list looking back on it in like 10-15 years. But there is one XXL list that does rank above them all here, the best of the bunch, the 2016 class. I know it's a bit cliche to put this at the top because this is everyone's pick, and especially coming from me, the guy who always has an unpopular opinion or contrarian type of take. But guys, there's a reason why the 2016 class has remained a fan favorite for so long, because it included some massive rappers. The lineup for this list had on it Lil Uzi Vert, Lil Yachty, Kodak Black, Denzel Curry, G Herbo, Dave East, Lil Dicky, Anderson .Paak, Designer, and 21 Savage. This is an all-star group in my opinion, and really when this list came out, like, it totally changed the rap game. Like, so many of these people just influenced the sound, influenced the style so much that this is like kind of the default sound now. Starting off with the biggest of the bunch, if you ask me, which is Lil Uzi Vert. Lil Uzi has just been on a winning streak for so long now. Like, I think back in like 2017, right after this list came out, he was definitely, you know, one that everyone took notice of, with, you know, EXO Tour Life being a huge hit, and then his feature with the Migos song Bad and Bougie, which is one of my favorites. And even recently this year, coming back with the Pink Tape, which is one of the best-selling albums of the year so far, especially in rap. So Lil Uzi has just cemented himself at this point as an absolute superstar. Denzel Curry is probably my favorite of the bunch. I think that Denzel Curry is extremely consistent. He's really never put out a bad project in my opinion. Just extremely lyrical. His stuff is very deep. He talks a lot about political stuff and, you know, has a very conscious mindset when it comes to his lyrics and his storytelling. But he's also just made some incredible beats. Like, his beat choices are just absolutely fantastic. Denzel Curry, very hard to argue against here. I think 21 Savage is another one who has just cemented himself at this point as an absolute legend. He has probably the best feature game of any rapper that we've discussed in this video. You can throw him with Post Malone or The Weeknd or pretty much anybody and he'll be an absolute ride or die for him. Kodak Black is someone who personally I'm not the biggest fan of, but you can't deny his success. He's had some massive songs over the years. And Kodak is definitely a personality that people love to watch because he's just so crazy, his antics and stuff. He definitely has a ride or die fandom as well, so he's going to be cemented for a while. Lil Yachty really surprised a lot of people, I think, with the release of his latest album that, you know, really changed his sound, went into more of a progressive, even like a rock style that a lot of people, you know, took notice of there. Lil Yachty is someone who has kind of been hit or miss for me personally with his individual singles and stuff. Sometimes I really like him, sometimes I think it's total trash. But no matter what, Lil Yachty will always be a very fun personality and someone who people want to root for. He's kind of like the underdog of this list. Anderson .Paak has really evolved himself. Like, I think Anderson .Paak is probably the most improved out of everyone here because I never really dug his early stuff. I think when this list debuted, it was kind of surprising to see him as part of it because he didn't really have a lot of big, you know, songs or anything at the time. But since then, he's of course done Silk Sonic with Bruno Mars, and that has just completely put him on another pedestal there. That stuff is just incredible. And he's just shown that he's a really fun, you know, vibrant artist. He does a lot of, like, you know, the R&B side, the disco type of stuff, stepping outside of rap again, which is very cool. And he has won just a shit ton of awards. Like, objectively, the man has just stacked Grammys on, you know, his name there. G Herbo, a Chicago legend there, is an incredibly gifted rapper, another one who's very lyrical. Same thing with Dave East, I think is in that category. I wouldn't say they're like, you know, the most commercially successful rappers, but if you know rap, if you know hip-hop, you definitely have a lot of respect for them. Designer is someone who I think is probably the definition of like a one-hit wonder again, but even still, Panda, people love Panda, and you know, that song is still very nostalgic and very fun to throw on when you're just chilling with your buds. And then the last person to talk about here is Lil Dicky, who I think is maybe the most hit or miss out of everybody here, depending on who you ask. To me, Lil Dicky really isn't even a rapper anymore. I consider him more of an actor now with his show Dave, which is very successful. He's another case kind of like with Lil Bibby, where a lot of his success came outside of music, and it was more about like marketing and stuff and putting himself with, you know, other performers that were big and sort of just getting his name out there that way. And then, of course, with the show kind of stepping outside of it and doing more just general entertainment type of stuff. So, again, a little debatable if you count his success towards the idea of like music and, you know, propelling this list up to the top. But regardless of what you think individually of Lil Dicky, the group as a whole here from 2016 was absolutely stacked, and this is definitively the best XXL Freshman List that they've ever put together. It's going to be a very, very long time until they ever come close to here, which is why 2016 is my #1 pick. But that is just my opinion here for all 16 of the lists. Let me know in the comments what you agreed with here and where you disagree. And as always, I would love to hear what you have to say on each of these lists if you want to rank them yourselves. Thanks for watching, everybody. Look forward to more videos here on the channel about hip-hop, rap, music of all kinds very, very soon. And before we go, I want to wish you guys a great rest of your day. Take care, and we'll see you in the next one.